Okay. So, Surah Fussilat, verse number 37, it is a Makki surah, and the theme, it falls under the theme of Allah and Himself. Why does it fall under the theme of Allah and Himself? Because Allah is talking about Himself. Walaikum Assalam to everybody who said Salam to me. So Allah is talking about Himself. Clear? Okay, next. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Okay, I forgot to put on my mic so you can hear me clearly. Is it clear? Okay, then the verse. ومن آيات بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن آياته الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر لا تسجدوا للشمس والقمر واسجدوا لله الذي خلقهن إن كنتم إياه تعبدون. Now the translation. And of his signs are the night and the day, and the sun and the moon. Do not prostrate to the sun or the moon, but prostrate to Allah, who created them, if it should be Him that you worship. Now, His signs are the night and the day. The night and the day. How do you think they are the signs? Like walking out during the daytime, how is it different from walking out during the nighttime? During the day the sun is out, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes the sun is not out, it's raining, but every day your sky looks different. Surah Fussilat, the next one, naturally we are going through sequence wise. First it was Ayatul Kursi, then it was Surah An-Nam, the next one is Surah Fussilat. And if you go out in the nighttime sky, it's totally different. You see so many. Has anybody ever gone to Gaon, or even maybe here you may have a charpai out in the Sehen, in which you lay down and look towards the night sky and you can see shooting stars and so on. It looks so beautiful. I mean, the night sky, you can never get tired of it. You see so many different things, so many different shapes through the stars. So these are the signs of Allah for those who recognize Allah. These signs, the night and the day, are under a divine guided system. I mean, the night and the day does not just come out of nowhere. It is systematically, like when the sun's light comes onto this part of the earth, then it is day there. Whereas the sunlight does not reach the other part of the earth, and then it is dark there. This happens systematically. It doesn't just happen haphazardly. And the sun and the moon, they are also the stars, the signs. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرِ. وَالشَّمْس is sun, وَالْقَمَرِ is moon. The sun and the moon. Have you realized that when the sun is up during the day, you can't even look at it, you can't see it, you just know it's there, but you can't see the boundary. But as soon as Asr time passes, you can see a well-defined sun. And then when you look at towards the moon, it has different patterns and different craters that you can see. And then when the sun and moon cross each other and there's an eclipse, that's also a very big sign of Allah. Imagine. the sun and the moon are signs of Allah. The sun is a great big ball of fire. Imagine if we were too close to it. We would all burn to death. But Allah has systematically kept us at such a distance that it does not affect us. We don't burn ourselves. And the moon, every time the moon comes out in the night, it has different phases. Like, how did we look for the Ramadan moon? We waited until we saw the new crescent, the halal. And then by looking at the halal, we can see that it's day 1, and then day 2, and then 3. I want you to notice the moon, the size and the shape of the moon during these Ramadan nights. I want you to step outside for a bit, look towards the moon. Okay, now what is the shape? It's the 13th, because usually we don't really count the Islamic calendar, but the only one that we really do know the date and do really count the Islamic calendar is Ramadan, because we're counting each and every Roza. I think it's the 13th Roza today. So today the sun would be near to a full moon. The moon would be near to a full moon. 13th, 14th, 15th of the lunar calendar is usually considered as the Ayam Bayda, the days of the whiteness. In other words, when the moon is totally huge and you see it white. So the moon's endless dance, like sometimes you can see it as the earth and the moon orbit the sun together. The pattern of the day and night on the lunar surface constantly changes. We refer to the percentage of the illumination on the visible face of the moon. As the moon's phase, there are 8 major named phases that have been known throughout human history. This is the side that you see from Earth. This is the side that you do not see from Earth. So we see this part. The part that is hidden from us is this part. So they both look different. Do you see how different they look? And then you can see how it orbits. And every single time we see a different shape of the moon. Now what is Allah saying? La tasjudu lishamsi wala qamar. Do not prostrate to the sun and the moon. You're most probably thinking, but who prostrates to the sun and the moon? There are people, there are polytheists who still prostrate to the sun and the moon. If you can see this, can you see this person standing and then bowing down and then going into a plank and then going into an inverted V? And then this is sun salutation of yoga steps. These are yoga steps. And remember, when we practice yoga as Muslims, like we're doing it just as an exercise, right? We just stretch up, we're just stretching our body. But Hindus, when they perform yoga, they are literally prostrating the sun. It is a sun salutation, it's called. You can look this up on the net if you don't believe me. So this is a whole form of sun salutation in which they are worshipping the sun. So Allah is saying, do not worship the sun, no matter how magnificent it looks, no matter how huge it looks, how much awe you feel from it, but do not worship it. And do not worship the moon. Some people still worship the moon. Do not worship the moon. La tasjudu li shamsi. Do not prostrate for the sun, wala qamar, and not for the moon. Wasjudu lillahi allazi khalaqahunna. Worship, prostrate only to Allah. Why only to Allah? Because He is the one who created that huge object that you think is very inspiring. These two are created by Allah, no matter how huge they look, how inspiring they are. Who are we supposed to worship? The creator of all these signs. So prostrate only to Allah. Prostration means doing sajda only to Allah, not to anything created. You should prostrate to Allah a great deal, for you will not perform one prostration to Allah but Allah will raise you 1 degree in status thereby and erase 1 sin for you. This is narrated by Sahih Muslim in his Sahih. Signs of Allah. Now let's just break up the verse. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and from amongst his signs. Whose signs? Allah's signs. Signs of Allah. What does sign of Allah mean? Something you see that reminds you of Allah. In other words, something you see that reminds you of Allah. Can you think of something that you look at that reminds you totally of Allah? As soon as you see it, reminds you of your faith and reminds you of Allah. You can type an answer. Something you see that reminds you of Allah. Like when I see the Hanaqaba, it reminds me of Allah. When you see people in ihram, it reminds you of Allah. Whenever I visit the mountainous areas of Pakistan, every time I go to Gilgit or Swat and the mountainous terrain, looking at that landscape always reminds me of Allah. So these are signs of Allah. Something that reminds you of Allah helps you to recognize Allah. How does it help you to recognize Allah? Like when I see these mountains, huge mountains, so beautiful, everywhere you look around, everything looks different. Then it reminds me that, oh Allah, if you have made this landscape so beautiful, how beautiful would Jannah be? How beautiful would you be? Helps you to recognize Allah, brings you closer to Allah. I usually tell people that when I was living in Gilgit for 2 years, that was the time I was the most closest to Allah. Why? Because when you live in natural surroundings, when you see nature, it takes you back to Allah. It reminds you of Allah a lot. But when you're living in a city in which you've just got, it's hazardous and, it's a load of traffic and you're living just amongst a whole lot of buildings and all you can see is just a bit of a sky, then you tend to grow away from Allah. Okay, ayat is also mentioned as the verses of Allah as well. So you have the natural ayat, in other words, which you can see, and then you have the verses of Allah. Do not get carried away in the magnificence of the signs. Now, this is what we're supposed to do. Do not get carried away in the magnificence of the signs. The magnanimity of Allah is to be recognized through them. Like if we think that the sun and the moon are magnificent, we are not supposed to be carried away with their magnificence. We're supposed to bring it back to Allah and think that, okay, oh my God, if He's made something so huge and so perfect, how would He be Himself? Prostrate only to Allah, sajda only for Him, ruku, bowing only for Him, and not for any idol, not to any creation, but the Creator. We're not going to be bowing down to any creation, but we will bow down to the Creator of the creation. وَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ الَّذِي خَلَقَهُنَّ. So prostrate that being who has created all of these things. And then the last part, in kuntum iyahu ta'budun. If it is only Him you worship, if it is only Him that you worship. Now what does that ta'budun? You worship, or you are a slave to, or you are obedient to. If you are a slave to Allah, then only worship Him. If you are obedient to Him, if you're only obedient to Him, if you are only submissive to Him, and you only abide by Him, and you only belong to Him, then what should you do? Only worship Allah. Theme. Now, recognize universal signs of Allah. This passage from Surah Fussilat, verse 37, is making us recognize the universal signs of Allah, the star, the moon, the night, the day, the mountains, anything that you see and it reminds you of Allah are the universal signs of Allah. Because who created this universe? Allah. Observing and pondering upon should bring one closer to Allah. In other words, when we observe these universal signs, when we ponder and think, contemplate on these universal signs, it brings you closer to Allah. Well, it should do. You're not supposed to think, oh yes, the scientist said this and the scientist said that. Science is based on the study of nature, right? So who created that nature? Allah. Pondering on nature is the natural journey that leads one to his Lord. Remember, when you ponder on nature, when you look at the natural things, like when you see rivers, streams, the sea, how huge they are and how perfect everything is going, it brings you to your Lord. Celestial bodies were created to serve and benefit mankind. In other words, the sun was created to benefit mankind. Why? So that, like, we have the day and we have enough heat to live on earth, and whereas if the sun was too far away, we would all freeze to death. So celestial bodies are created to serve and benefit mankind. The moon is created as a satellite for the earth. And remember, we also count the lunar calendar through the moon. Man's duty is to serve Allah in return for all the comforts provided for his survival. And I mean, the water on the earth, the mountains in which you take out minerals, the sun that provides you enough heat and light during the day, and the moon that is used as a calendar, these are provided for mankind to keep mankind comfortable. So what is man's duty? Is to thank Allah in return for the comfort that he has provided on this earth. Importance of the theme. Muslims interact with many people from other faiths. Like you most probably don't interact, but when you go abroad internationally to other places, Muslims interact with many people from other faiths. And this verse warns Muslims not to indulge in polytheism. What is polytheism? Worshipping multiple gods. Muslims are ordered to worship the creator of these creations. Food, and this verse is food for thought for a Muslim to check if they are really subservient and submissive to their Lord. Muslims check their obedience and loyalties by contemplating on this verse, because in the end Allah is saying that, okay, only worship him if it is he that you worship. Like if you're worshipping someone else, or if you are lost in the awe of something else, then then it doesn't matter what you do. But if you say and you claim that you worship only Allah, then you should be obedient to him, you should be subservient to him, you should be submissive to him, and you should only worship him and not anything else. Now, this is the theme that I told you before, that I usually write for my students in O2 when they're near to the end of the something is wrong with my mobile. Usually I write it to the end of the year, but because we are not in a regular class and it's difficult for you to interact and ask your questions, that's why I've added my written themes to the presentation. Theme. The theme of the verse is Allah and Himself. From Surah Fussilat, a Makki surah. Allah is making the Makkans and the present day Muslims realize that the celestial bodies, in other words, the sun, moon, stars, or natural objects, mountains, rivers, and trees, are all universal signs of Allah. That one's observing and pondering upon them should bring them one closer to Allah and not get lost in the awe and considering them supernatural. Pondering on nature is the natural journey that leads one to his Lord, but some get diverted and start worshipping it instead of recognizing the creator or primal originator. As mentioned in Surah Al-An'am, the one that we recited the other day, you can add a supporting verse here, Badi'u samawati wal ard, he is the primal originator of the heavens and the earth. Clear? Man is ordered in the verse not to worship or prostrate to these bodies, but only worship and prostrate to Him. As the celestial bodies were created to serve and benefit mankind, so in return, it is man's duty to serve Allah in return for all the comforts provided for his survival on earth and worship Him in gratitude. Importance in a Muslim's life. Present day Muslims interact with many people from other faiths, such of whom still worship celestial bodies, objects, mystic characters, and mythical beings. This verse is warning Muslims not to indulge in such like activity, like mythical beings and mystic characters. If you look into Hinduism, do you see how their goddesses or gods have like their mystical type of characters? This verse is warning Muslims not to indulge in such like activity. Muslims are ordered to worship the Creator of all the objects visible to them. Their attention is drawn to the signs of Allah. Observing and pondering on the signs of Allah is also considered an ibadah in Islam. Like when Allah orders you in the Quran, it's continuously mentioned, "Afala ta'qilun," don't you keep an intellect? And it's continuously asked in the Quran to ponder on nature. And so if Allah is asking you to ponder on nature, it becomes an ibadah. The verse ends with a question for Muslims. If it is only He you serve, obey, or are a slave to, it is food for thought for Muslims to check if they are really subservient and submissive to their Lord, or are they lost and bewildered in His created world. Okay, sometimes this is very important, that are we lost in this bewildered in His created world? Sometimes we do not become slave, or we do not worship our, like the moon and the sun and the stars and so on, like other people, but sometimes other things we start worshipping, like if you take something created like our mobiles, our TV sets, we literally start worshipping them in the sense that we can't even live without them. Like we will skip our namaz just because we're on our mobile, or we're on Facebook, or on whatever medium, and sometimes it's the TV or a program or cartoons. We become so submissive to the TV and our mobile systems or our PlayStation that we reject the commands of Allah. So like, yeah, maybe you're not worshipping the sun and the moon and the stars, but then sometimes in our lives, we give other things the status that we should be giving to Allah. I mean, how long does anybody spend with the Quran or reciting the Quran? A very little time. So Muslims check their obedience and loyalties by contemplating on this verse. In other words, this should make you think. Like over here it's mentioned, La tasjudu lil shamsi wal qamar, don't prostrate to the sun and the moon. But then remember, sometimes we skip Allah's orders for our friends, or for playing outside. It could be anything. So you should contemplate that, okay, don't get carried away in the things that Allah has provided for you. The main importance is understanding Tawheed. In other words, what are you supposed to understand here? Tawheed, that Allah is the only one worthy of worship. No one else is.